Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're talking about land and expand selling today, and specifically, we're talking about strategies for land and expand selling around security risk assessments. With me today is Ian Richardson, the CEO of Doberman Technologies, an MSP in Mason, Michigan. And one of the most interesting things about their MSP right now is they actually grew their revenue through the pandemic using strategies like land and expand selling. So I'm excited for him to share a little bit about how he works with managed sales pros to set it up and then he knocks it down. But I really want to focus today on how you can not walk away empty-handed, either from your sales calls or from your sales meetings. So from every part in the sales process, from prospecting right on through to closing, we're going to talk about how you can lead with the managed services opportunity, but if it's not possible to win that opportunity in a reasonable time frame, how can we use other products and services like security risk assessments to win the business? So Ian, how are you doing today?
I am excellent, Carrie. Thanks for inviting me along on the ride.
All right, so our presenters today are myself, Carrie Simpson, CEO of Managed Sales Pros. I've been working with MSPs and vendors for the last 7 years, helping them all grow their monthly recurring revenue. We are a channel-only company. We work with MSPs and vendors only. One of our clients is Doberman Technologies. We've been working with them for about 1.5 years now.
Yep.
And I'm excited to let Ian do most of the talking today. All right, so on our agenda today, we've already gone through meet your presenters. This is a brand new platform for me. So while we're going through all of this, let me make sure that everyone can hear us okay and everyone knows how to ask questions and interact with us. So beginning with that, can everyone hear us all right? Are you able to either type in, yes, I can hear you. I can see that there's a bunch of people on the webinar today, but I've only been using this platform for a very brief period of time, and I haven't had an interactive webinar yet. So somebody said, yes, they can hear us. Fantastic. So let's start with prospecting. A question I'd like to ask everyone if they're open to answering it, and just go ahead and type in your answers. How many of you are doing outbound phone-based or email prospecting at this time? Thanks, Ian.
I just figured I'd participate.
Okay. So phone, email, or both? And are you also engaged in other types of outbound marketing? Social, phone, and then email? So it sounds like people are developing cadences around it.
AdWords too.
That's cool. I don't understand AdWords. Maybe that's the next thing I'll study. I'm studying SEO optimization right now, and it's a rabbit hole you never come out of.
It's the dark arts of marketing.
A 10x7 approach. Steve, you're going to have to follow up with me afterwards and tell me what the 10x7 approach is, because I do not know that term. So the first thing we're going to talk about is when you're outbound prospecting and you're looking for managed services opportunities. Is there anybody on the call today that does project work outside of a managed services agreement, or is everybody here pure play managed? Are you doing project work without a managed commitment?
Yep. That's the land and expand, you might call it, the good old find a foot in the door, especially with telecom.
But you're doing it with an eye towards winning the
Always.
Managed services contract. You're not just doing random projects and then never engaging with that firm again.
Always. We're always following up. Depending on the opportunity, if someone's got a large professional services engagement and they're just looking for that extra bit of hands, that extra support, we're happy to come in and do that, even with understanding that there is no managed service follow-up, but it's got to be of a certain size. So if we're a high 5-figure, low 6-figure dollar professional service opportunity, yeah, I'll take that. I'll keep one of my guys busy for a month or two to win that professional services revenue. But if it's a lower dollar amount, like a $10,000 or $20,000 server opportunity, we're only going to go after that if we feel even if it hasn't been explicitly stated that, hey, this could lead to something more.
Okay.
So
there's two ways that you can prospect. You can go in with a laser focus talking about a particular product or service, or you can go in there with a wider, like, we're looking to find out what kind of problem this person is having. Personally, I like the second approach. I like to go in and I like to ask them what they'd like to know about IT or what's not working for them currently. I don't want to go into the conversation saying like, hey, it's Carrie calling from Doberman Technologies and we are experts on security risk assessments. I don't want to lead with a less expensive product or service. I want to go in talking about the thing that I want to win, which is the managed services contract. Managed services is a term that nobody really uses outside of our industry, though. So when you're talking about managed services on the phone, you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage, because when you say managed services, the minute somebody says, what's that? You've lost that prospect. Now you got to go back, you got to re-educate them. Now they're feeling a little bit foolish that they didn't understand what you're talking about, even though they're already buying that thing. So imagine if my IT company calls it fixed rate managed services or fixed rate IT and not managed services, right? Well, you want to make sure you're always speaking the same language as the people that you're talking to. So when you're beginning your outbound prospecting calls, I think that you can approach it from a, hey, tell us what you need aspect more than a, you need to buy this aspect. Is anybody doing, I noticed a couple of people mentioned that they're doing contract outbound. Is there people that are, is there a link to join the thing? Yeah, I think so. Hold on. Is there a link to join? I feel like if I touch anything right now, everything's going to go to hell.
if you go to managesalespros.com/webinars, right?
Live streams, managesalespros.com/live streams. There. Michael, thank you. You're a lifesaver. This is the first time I've actually done a webinar with another person on the same screen. So it's kind of cool. So we can give that a minute while your sales rep joins us, but like continuing on with the conversation, for those of you that are doing your own prospecting, how are you opening your calls? What are you usually saying when you get somebody who picks up the phone?
So on our end, we usually we take the direct approach. Hey, it's Ian with Doberman Technologies calling to talk to you about who I could speak with to provide a quote for IT support. Right?
Who taught you that sentence?
I think she's sitting right over here. So my caller Matt follows the same script every single time, right? So we just call in and say, hey, would I talk to you to provide a bit about IT support? They say they're happy. That's where the whole conversation comes in. Happy is like the second best answer we could have, right? Oh, we've already got a managed service provider. We already have an IT partner, and we're really happy with them because it lets us say, that's great. And then there's a pivot point, right? And so whenever you're ready to talk about that pivot point, we can dive into that one.
Yeah, one of the most valuable parts of prospecting while you're aggregating information through your outbound calls is identifying where your competitors are falling down. So yeah, everybody's happy with their current IT right now, but I guarantee you their IT provider pissed them off somehow in the past or is going to in the future. Nobody's happy with their IT provider all the time. And one of the things that we do at Managed Sales Pros really well is help remind people of that horrific onboarding experience that they had 2 years ago. So maybe they're happy today, but if we can just start poking the bear a little bit and identifying where they may have fallen down a bit, that works really well. But it only works really well if you're tracking what people are saying while you're calling them. So outbound prospecting isn't always about winning an appointment every call. Sometimes it's about finding out who your competitors are working with. You want to find out when their contracts are up for renewal. You want to find out what they're actually buying from them so you can do apples to apples comparisons. Are they actually buying a managed services contract, or are they just doing break fix, or are they a single point of contact contract? What are they actually doing? So the more information you can learn, even when somebody says that they're happy with their current IT, the better it is for you. So if the first question is normally, what are you doing for IT support? And the shutdown is either like, oh, we're good, or, oh, we don't need that, or, oh, we're happy with their current IT. The first thing I want to find out is, what is their current IT? What are they doing? So is their current IT one of your best competitors, or is it the guy that lives across the street that fixes their computers for a case of beer? If they say IT guy, do they mean the outsourced guy that comes into their office every time they get called when something breaks? So a better clarifying question after that, hey, we're happy with our current IT, is asking them how they receive IT right now. And if the person that answers the phone doesn't know that, the next question is usually, well, what do you do if your computer isn't working properly? Right? So that everybody's had to call IT support, or they've had to call the person that allows them to ask for IT support. And that's a better way to begin that conversation. But let's assume for a minute that they are happy with their current IT provider. So you call them, you've had that initial, hey, who do I speak to provide a quote for IT support? Either they're going to tell you who that person is, they're going to try to send you to the IT department, or they're going to tell you, oh, that's me, right? So then you want to clarify who that person is. And from there, you go on to the conversation about whether or not they're actually happy with their current IT support. So in a prospecting case, you don't ever want to pay lip service to the competitor. You don't want to say anything bad about them either, but there's a way that you can lead them through a conversation that identifies all of the pain points that they've experienced along the road with that competitor. And as I mentioned before, the more you know about how your competitors fall down, and I guarantee you, if you make a list of the things that your clients were pissed off about over the last 6 months, your competitors' clients are pissed off about those things too. Nobody's perfect. Like, think about the problems you've had with service delivery, right? Everybody got hit with COVID. Everybody had staffing issues. People didn't come into work. Stuff didn't get done on time. People wanted to win business, so they went outside of their regular onboarding schedules, for example. A client wants to onboard in 2 weeks. It usually takes you a month, but you say yes because you don't want to lose the deal. Right? Things like that happen all the time, and it's happening to your competitors as well. So they're easier to displace when you can start poking holes in things. But the security assessment, or any land and expand strategy, comes from you having a conversation, not about trying to move that person out of the way, but opening them to the idea that potentially a second set of eyes would be beneficial for their business at this time. A neutral evaluator of the processes, policies, and products that they're using to support their business. So Ian, you know far more about those things than I do. So let's talk a little bit about what people might be able to say to a prospect to convince them to allow another company to come in and have a conversation with them.
Yeah, so there's
the link, it is available on demand. Thank you guys.
So there's a couple of key points in there. One thing back on the competitors, just before we dive into the risk assessment pivot. One of the things that we did internally is I just made a spreadsheet of every single time when we lost someone over 12 months and put in a basic reason. So it was a service delivery issue. We dropped the ball in communication. We charged too much. They didn't like this technician, whatever it might be. We just put that down, and then we listed out every single competitor that we had awareness of, and we ranked those competitors on the sheet from, hey, we run into these guys all the time. We see them once or twice. We see them once or twice a quarter. We've heard of them once or twice in the sum total of 15 years of doing this. The once or twice guys down at the bottom, we really kind of ignore. It's just more around situational awareness. But those top two columns, we give them a 1 through 3 rating on every issue we have. We think this happens to them all the time, some of the time, never. So 3 is great, 1 is bad, right? So 1 means like, hey, this never happens to them. 2 means some of the times, 3 means all the time. The higher the point scale, the easier it is to displace that competitor. And then I just share that data with my caller and say, hey, Matt, when you talk to someone, if they say that they're using ABC IT, I know that their onboards are terrible, their documentation is bad, and every time they're in a building, it looks like a mess. They don't wipe their shoes off, they leave cable ties all over, etc. So find a way to work these conversations in there, and you'll open up a door even if they're happy, right? So On the risk assessment pivot, Carrie, you nailed it on the head, right? Like, hey, when was the last time we had a second set of eyes? And we always approach this through a collaborative aspect. So, Carrie, I'm glad to hear that ABCIT is taking care of you. Last thing we ever would want to do is come between a successful relationship. When's the last time we had an independent audit, and that's a key word, an independent audit of the security at the business to give ABC a hit list of things to take care of over the next year? And so there's a couple of things to unpack there. Audit is a very special word. I've tried this phrase a lot of different times, and when you say audit, people go like this. Just try it next time you're doing a Zoom call with someone. Say, oh yeah, we wanted to audit something, and watch their body language. If it's someone who's actually invested in the business's success, so if your point of contact's a manager, owner, etc., you're going to see a slight shift. They're going to lean forward a little bit. They'll engage. They might uncross their arms. Their hands might grab onto their knees. I know you can't see mine, but they might grab onto your knees, etc. They'll lean forward a little bit. All those body signs of positive engagement. It's a triggering word. When's the last time we had an audit of the security? And you want to use security. Don't use network. Don't use IT. Don't use systems. Use security. When's the last time we had an audit of security in the business to give ABC a hit list for the next year? And so that hit list is kind of like that key deliverable, right? Like they're expecting there's going to be multiple things found wrong. You're trying to plant that seed that, hey, there's not one thing wrong with your network right now. There's a bunch of stuff wrong. And it's going to take a year to solve. That's the underlying messaging, that subliminal messaging that you're giving to someone by using the line. And so you might not hear them because you're cold calling. You don't have a Teams meeting with them right now, but they're going to be sitting up like that. And if they're at all remotely invested, they're going to give you one of three things. One, they're going to either just disengage, hang up, like, no, we're all set. We don't care about that. You were talking to the wrong person to use that line on, right? A gatekeeper isn't going to necessarily care about that. If you're talking to a receptionist, when's the last time? Buddy, I got calls to take. And they're going to hang up, right? They're going to say, oh, that sounds interesting, right? Like, or some other sort of indicative buying sign. Or they're going to say, well, my guys take care of that. And that's when you can spin this around. Oh, really? I'd be interested in hearing more about that because we use third parties routinely to double check our work. It's difficult to see what's wrong in our own house if we don't periodically bring in a fresh set of eyes. So you can kind of spin the mirror back around and say, hey, we do this. By the way, you might want to try to find a third-party audit partner so that you're not just feeding a line and you're eating your own dog food, but swing that around and say, oh, well, we've used a third party in-house because we found it's difficult to do that. I'd be interested in hearing about that. Could you share? Take notes. Same thing with when you get that back on the competitor thing, you just talked about it so much that it reminds me, one of the things I love to ask when someone says, oh, I'm really happy, what about your current IT do you like best? Leave that open-ended question, start taking notes, right? Because that's the thing to circle around on in 3 months. Oh yeah, hey, how's it going with ABC? They still knocking it out of the park on response time?
Well, it's hasn't been as good as it was previously, but it's still all right.
Oh, well, tell me more about that, right? And then you've opened the door for a conversation to kind of drive that wedge in. So assuming that you're talking to the right person, you're talking to that decision maker, you're talking to someone who's invested in the business success, you plant that seed around an audit, and they're going to come in and say, well, yeah, let's talk more about that. This is where you're closing the deal, right? And your rep has to be competent enough to then shift that conversation to getting you that phone appointment. Well, the first step in this would be to schedule a 1-hour sit down with the CEO, Ian, to talk through a risk assessment, talk through what's going on, set expectations, and give you a price.
Yeah.
And so my risk assessments are a fixed fee item. So depending on how many buildings there are, that's usually if there's a per building upcharge. But I know that if I'm going in and doing a risk assessment, hey, it's $3,000. You got a building, extra buildings, $500 kicker per building because we got to go to a different location to run a scanner, right? So I got to have an engineer run around to 6 different places. Well, you're going to have an extra $3,000 on top for that extra time. That's $3,000 engagement. So I can walk into there without any sort of calculation because it's a productized service. And mainly what we're talking about is what they can expect. So that conversation with the decision maker is, well, has there been any security incidents in the past? Any reason for concern on your plate? Things that we should know about. Here's the things that we ought to look at. And you walk them through how you do a technical assessment. You do a...
Okay, so let's not do this on the prospecting call.
Yeah, you're not doing that on the prospecting call.
You don't
right?
need to train your cold caller on how to do anything technical at all. The less your cold caller knows about the actual technology that is used to do security assessments, the more successful they will be. Because the last thing you want your cold caller doing is backing themselves into a corner that they can't get out of when they end up speaking with someone who is significantly more technical than they are.
Yep.
So the first time they get nailed with a question that they have to go, you've just lost all of your credibility. So you really want to focus on what are the business problems that you're trying to solve right now. It isn't about the technology that you're going to use to solve the problem. That's the MSP's problem. Right? Like, I don't care what you're using to solve the problems that I have. So when I think about hiring an MSP the first time, what were the problems that I was trying to solve? Well, I didn't want any of my team members to be able to access any of my data outside of my office or outside of business hours, right? The most valuable thing I own is the data on every managed service provider in North America. The last thing I wanted was somebody having the ability to download that database when somebody wasn't looking, or downloading client files or doing anything like that. So what was my business problem? Well, I work for a high turnover company where people are coming and going constantly. Nothing would stop a competitor from applying for a calling job. It's a telemarketing job. You don't need to have a university degree. It's not rocket science. We hire anybody who will come into work every day and make phone calls. And if they get good at it, we let them stay. So how easy would it be for a bad actor to wander into my office, sit down at a desk, work for me for 2 months, go home one day, log into my CRM system, and then slowly and deliberately start downloading all my data? That was a huge concern for me. That's a problem I needed to solve. But if you started talking to me about what we were going to use to solve that problem, my eyes would have glazed over and I wouldn't have been able to continue the conversation. I'm not that technical. So when you think about prospecting into a business, look at the 20 to 50 seat space. People start businesses because they love what they're doing, right? They don't really care about the technology that they're using to run their business. They care about the thing that they run their business about. Like, I like cold calling. I don't really care how it goes. I just like to talk to people and I like to make phone calls. So please facilitate that for me. Right? And then as your business matures, you have to start worrying about other things and how they're going to talk to the other things that are within your company. So in year 1, my business problems looked like X. And then by year 3, it was like, hey, I've got these 4 disparate databases that don't talk to each other. We're doing all this redundant activity. I'm losing, 40 minutes per person per day of productivity because of this. Like my problems are changing, but I need somebody, if they're calling me to ask me if I want IT support, they're going to have to be able to present me with interesting ideas on how I might be able to use technology. But if they talk about the nuts and bolts of it, that's just confusing for me. So when you think about security risk assessments, what are the things that you're trying to keep safe? You want to keep your data safe, right? Money.
That's the crux of it, is it's data and money, right?
The big question is, like, oh, we're great. Great. Are you 100% certain that your company could survive a financial breach right now? Oh, what's a financial breach? Oh, well, let me tell you, right? Like, there's all kinds of little questions that you can poke in there that don't talk about technology at all. They just talk about the bad things that happen if you're not using the right technology.
And again, that's on our end, if we're scheduling a risk assessment, it's all around being the friend to everyone. So if you're going in and someone's got an existing provider, that risk assessment goes way easier if that provider's on your team. So you're going to ask specifically, hey, I've got a list of questions that either you can run by or we can run by the existing provider to make sure we get the right data. And you're going to ask for inventories. You're going to ask for access. You're going to ask for a username so you can run your scanning and inventory tools, all those types of things. It's much easier if you go, hey, independent guy, I'm going to want to have a meeting with your provider one-on-one to walk through the hit list too, to kind of talk through with them on a technical level, make sure everything's copacetic, right? You're everybody's friend. And all you're doing is trying to collect as much data about as many risks in a multifaceted way, and then present that in a non-technical manner to someone who cares about the business. So for example, you go in, you find 10 different technical things that are wrong. You find out that they never talk to any third parties about their policies, procedures, and security practices. Their backups have never been tested. They have no plans or policies or anything like that in there. Well, you've got 4 different things. The technical mumbo jumbo, they're not going to care. You're going to say, hey, we found these 15 different technical items. Probably going to take a while. We've gone through it with your partner and should be well in hand. They'll be reaching out to you about solving those. You just fulfilled your good guy quotient. Those other 3 things. Hey, by the way, you've got 10 outside cloud vendors and you've never talked to any of them about any of their procedures. How are you managing that risk? Oh, well, I don't know. Does ABC IT do that for you? Oh, I don't think so. Oh, okay. Well, that's something that you ought to do. It's your business. It's your data. It's the utmost responsibility of you to protect it. And if you're parsing it into these 10 different locations, you've got 10 times the potential risk. We should do this with all of them. Here's a list of questions you should ask them and see and evaluate your vendors through that lens.
We got a couple of questions coming in, so I'm going to cut you off for a second. But so the first question was, do you offer a guarantee for a risk assessment? I don't know what you could guarantee. I mean, you guarantee that, like, best case scenario for a company would be, like, for me anyway, if I hired someone to do an independent risk assessment and they came in and they said, everything's great, your IT guy's perfect, I'd be like, oh, awesome, thank you, here's my check, goodbye. Right? Like, that's really what I want to hear.
As someone who does risk assessments, no, we don't offer any sort of guarantee. There's no, so the big regulate.
Like, that's kind of.
I'm guessing, is this around, Michael? I'm guessing this is around like CFR 45 or HIPAA compliance, PCI compliance, something like that. Is it around like, hey, are you compliant with code A or whatever?
Oh, and the second question, the follow-up is, if they sign onto an agreement, is it credited towards their contract? No. So in this scenario, so let's back up a little bit. We're prospecting for new business, and we come across a perfect managed services opportunity for your business. Let's say you're a niche-focused IT company, and you focus exclusively on law firms that have more than 20 lawyers, but under 100. And we identify that there is a company in that sweet spot. We managed to get somebody on the phone to talk about it. They're happy with their current provider. When we talk about security risk assessments in this capacity, what we're doing is trying to identify a way that we can generate revenue and not walk away empty-handed. So they're happy with their current provider. Great. We want to start poking holes in that, but we also want to add to our annual revenue. And how do we do that if every company that we call is already engaged with another IT provider? And pretty much at this point, if they don't have an MSP, if they're not buying security somewhere, if they're not buying IT from someone, it's not important to them, and you're not going to win the business. The odds on there being a net new company that has 30 employees that doesn't have any kind of IT support, there is no land grab here. So everybody's working with someone. They're happy with them, they're not happy with them, right? Best case scenario for a cold calling company like mine is we stumble into an opportunity where they just got hit with ransomware, and they had a small IT company that was giving them a sweetheart deal, and they didn't know how to solve the problem. And we introduced them to a company that's using Huntress, for example, and they go in there and they fix it right away, and boom, now they quote on the business. You know how often that happens? Like maybe twice a year across our entire client base. So most of the time, you're spending your time trying to earn the opportunity just to sit down and meet with someone. So another person asked, don't most MSPs do security risk assessments? I don't know. Do they? Right. There are, let's call it 80,000 IT providers in North America, approximately. Of those 80,000 IT providers in North America, 12,000 have self-identified as offering managed services. Of those 12,000, about 6,000 self-identify as offering managed security solutions. Of the 6,000 that offer managed security, those are also the companies that have, on average, more than 1,000 endpoints under management. So they're a little more operationally mature. The odds on you bumping into one of the other, 6,000 companies that hasn't quite figured out security yet, that hasn't quite figured out anything outside of like going in and fixing boxes yet. There's a lot of you guys out there, and some of you have it figured out and some of you don't. It doesn't mean that you're not. So here's an interesting thing about technology and managed services. You don't have to be the best MSP. You have to have the best marketing, period.
So from an MSP standpoint on all those questions, we don't guarantee anything on the risk assessment. We're not lawyers. And so whenever you come into a compliance item, I only let a lawyer do a guarantee because it's a legal item. It's a legal binding item. So we say that our risk assessments are in alignment and can check a box, but we don't offer any sort of guarantee ever. I would say that most MSPs, in my experience, do offer a security risk assessment. It's a compliance check the box type of risk assessment. So if you're going through and saying, okay, here's this questionnaire that I downloaded online, or some sort of other type of check the box type item, if you're not actually diving in and doing
Let's talk about the Microsoft score.
Let's talk about the Microsoft Secure Score, right? Like, are you doing this? Yes, no. If your risk assessment is primarily yes, no answers, then think about the practical aspect of analyzing risks that are non-technical, because the majority of risk to a business is non-technical. It might have technical solutions, but usually they're business problems.
For example, the last time I listened to you talk about a security risk assessment with a third party, there were things like doors.
Yep.
Where are the doors? Where are the exits? Where are the entrances?
Yep.
Where are the fire exits?
Yep.
Who has keys to them? How many old employees still have pass keys? Like, there are other risks outside of the ones that you would think of off the top of your head, or the Microsoft check the boxes risks. It's not just a technology risk. There are physical risks to your business as well. So there are lots of interesting conversations to have around that. Like, did your IT company come in and look at your building and talk to you about that?
One of the easiest things that I did pre-COVID with a risk assessment to prove value to someone is walk to them to their external door when they wouldn't invest in an alarm system, wouldn't invest in cameras, and bump the lock. Say, lock me out, bump the lock in 30 seconds, open it up and say, okay, see why you need an alarm system or cameras? Because that was really easy to do. So thinking a little bit outside of the compliance-based risk assessment, most of your competitors are probably doing the compliance check the box. So if you're able to differentiate your risk assessment, the feedback I get on mine is, wow, I've done these for 10 years. I've never done one like that. And that becomes a really easy, well, thank you very much. That's really kind of you. Would you mind signing off on this testimonial? And who of your colleagues could benefit from one of these? And suddenly you've got a whole bunch of referrals from risk assessments. Last but not least, on crediting, I never would credit a consulting engagement because I always want my consulting to be considered a billable service. A risk assessment takes a lot of time. It's usually 10 to 12 hours intensive of my time. I run them at Doberman, and that I bill out high. So, and that's not to mention just the simple things like network inventory and emails and coordination and scheduling, right? So you're all in for 20 hours into a service. I want to get paid for that.
And Michael, the goal on this one isn't to, this isn't an unserviced account, right? This is somebody who has an IT company that they're already happy with. And we're hoping that they're going to like what they learn on the risk assessment, that there's going to be enough holes in the process or the program that they're running already, that when it is time, and most reasonable business owners aren't breaking their contracts over one or two little issues, right? death by 1,000 paper cuts, whatever. You're not going to go get into a legal battle with somebody that's just okay. You're going to ride out that contract. And when it's time for you to ask someone else to quote, this is a long game. So you do the security risk assessment, and then you check in with them constantly.
Oh, yeah.
Did that get rectified? Have they solved that problem for you yet? And so on and so forth. The goal is to get the renewal, not to win the business right now. So if you identify an opportunity for security risk assessment with a company that doesn't have a managed service provider, that might be a time where you might consider using that as a loss leader to win the business. But as a general rule, if you're going to go in and meet for an hour with somebody and talk to them about winning their managed services contract, are you going to build them up front first? Is that going to give you an advantage or a disadvantage? Most of the time, my suggestion would be you want to get any barrier to entry out of the way. And if I have to write a check just to talk to you about your services, I'm not so interested in that when there's 4 other guys down the street that'll come and meet with me for free. And in my mind, they do exactly what you do. So differentiating right now is really hard. Nobody sees the difference between company A or company B. People don't see the difference between a small franchise IT provider with 3 people, who have great marketing, or a 50-seat, well-established, operationally mature IT company. The people you're selling to don't understand the difference. And that's probably the biggest challenge when it comes to prospecting is everybody, it's a commodity now. IT support is IT support, right? Like you think about your internet, you're going to use Comcast or you're going to use the other guy, and they're equally shitty, so you don't care, right? Like the idea of changing IT providers for most people is more concerning than the idea that like they know what they're getting at least at this point, right? Like the devil, they know how to put in tickets. They know people like, yeah, maybe they're not. I've never heard in all of my time prospecting, yeah, we love them, we'd never leave them. What I hear is we're not going to leave them. It would be very inconvenient. So wowing people is pretty hard when you can't get your foot in the door. These little things that allow you to get your foot in the door, these land and expand opportunities, those are the things that help you one piece at a time get closer to getting that contract renewal, which is the big thing that you want to track for when you're prospecting. So it's not just about, hey, can we have an appointment? Can we come in there and talk to you about your managed IT? What you're doing is trying to identify when does their contract renew? Who are they working with? What do they like? What are they actually buying? Once you get all that information, you start aggregating it together, looking at your pipeline, and then you'll know, hey, this company, they must have signed a ton of business in 2018 because everybody on ABC's roster is up for renewal right now. How are we going to pick them off one at a time? Right? For us, what I'm looking for is trigger events in the market. So let's say that 2 companies in Michigan merge. 2 IT companies in Michigan that compete with Doberman have decided to merge. I absolutely know that their service delivery is going to go to shit during the merger. And I'm going to start trying to pick off each and every one of those clients while that's happening. That transition is going to take 6 months. Things are going to get lost in the shuffle, and it happens to everybody. So nobody get up in arms about it. Like, we've been doing this a long time. We know when it's easy to win new business. So at those points, those are the points where you start really aggressively looking for those land and expand opportunities. Because if you can be the first person in, when they start getting really disgruntled, you're the first phone call.
So to circle back around to kind of the risk assessments and
Did I go off on a rant?
You did. You went off on a bit of a tangent there. To circle back around, as Carrie was saying, what we do is we'll track all of those issues. On the technical items, we do a simple accountability email once every 90 days to where, hey, Carrie, there was those list of 15 technical items. Did ABC get those solved for you? And then I will do a phone call at a different level and say, hey, Carrie, just following up on our conversation about those 10 third parties that you had to risk manage. How has the conversations been going? Who's replied? Who hasn't replied? And really kind of doing a little bit more consultative conversation to keep that argument going. Meanwhile, my business rep is going to call back Carrie every 90 days or so and say, hey, how's it going with ABC IT? The whole point of your risk assessment is to be able to come in with the third party provider and give them like, hey, here's a list of projects you guys got to do. And I'll tell you why. Like, it sounds like you're giving them money. You're really giving them a bomb. hey, here's a list of projects you guys got to do. Here's a list of stuff you guys have to do. Okay. Really, it's like the worst Trojan horse you could ever give to your competitor by doing all this to them. You're using that to plant a seed of doubt, as well as create a response time and pricing issue. So the seed of doubt comes from, hey, there's 15 technical problems from this company they have a 10-year relationship with, from basic patching all the way to gaping security holes in file structure to whatever else it is you managed to dig up on them. So there's these 15 really scarily worded problems with CVV2 scores and all that other type of stuff that looks like your house is on fire. And all you said is, hey, I've gone over this with ABCIT and they've got a little hit list, they'll reach out to you. That's all you're doing with the technical items. You're not talking about any of them with them. You're not trying to explain tech stuff to them. That's the IT guy's problem.
Yeah, people
So
don't
all
make
they
buying
do
decisions
is
when
they
they're
get,
afraid.
the first time they get this report, they have 15 things that all look really scary and you're not giving them any assurances. I've gone over with ABCIT. They're going to reach out to you to solve those. And so when they go to bed that night, all they're thinking about is, well, all of these things that sound really, really bad. I've been using ABCIT for 10 years. Why do these exist in my network right now? That's your seed of doubt. So when ABC gets busy or has a response time problem or has turnover or merges or gets a new 100-seat account, this 10-year account suddenly starts to have other problems, and that seeded out bubbles back up because people remember negative things far longer than they remember positive experiences. That's seeded out for the client. With ABCIT, your Trojan horse is those 15 issues to solve. Well, ABCIT is great. We've worked with them for 15 years. They give us such a great price. It's a good deal. They're awesome guys, and we know the owner, and everything's awesome. And suddenly you gave them this bookload of business that they have to solve, that because they've been there for 10 years, because they have a sweetheart deal, because they haven't raised rack rate up to market pricing, they're not going to want to be able to solve all of those for free. And they're going to be looking at monthly price increase, and they're going to be looking at professional services fees. So either ABCIT is going to do 15 things for free and get soaked, or they're going to have a pricing conversation. And that's your triggering event. Because suddenly now ABCIT's been here and they've had us for 10 years and there was a lot of problems on here and they've been doing risk assessments for 5 and said everything was fine. And then the second we brought in this other company just to look at it with a neutral eye, there was these 15 critical things that were lurking under the sheets that seems like they've been there for a while. And then when the ABCIT and I talked, now they want to charge me an extra $2,000 a month for all this security stuff. This isn't such a good deal anymore. I don't know if these guys have my best interest at heart. And that's the trust leaving the building. And if you're calling every 90 days, maybe they buy this IT security, maybe they don't, maybe they're in negotiations, but you're calling back in 90 days and maybe suddenly ABCIT, because you've done this to 3 of their accounts, has so much work that they're up to their eyeballs and they haven't been able to hire anyone. And because their processes are a little immature, they're starting to struggle. Now you've got it in with all of them.
Right, so a couple more questions have come in. One is, what tools are you using?
Tool neutral on the webinar, right?
Tool neutral on the webinar.
No comment on tools.
And then Steve wrote us a little bit of a script. And Steve, you have to put $10 in the actually jar, which is a thing that we do at our house because my kids are too smart for their own good. Well, actually, anytime you use actually, what you're doing is saying, I'm smarter than you.
Another one's just, right?
Oh, just is a terrible word. I'm
like
just calling to. No, you're not just anything. You're calling. So
it's a 4-letter word.
Yeah. Imagine, like, get rid of all that filler stuff. So think about brevity. Like if you're on the phone, you're trying to get to a certain end goal. And usually the end goal is, I want confirmation on whatever's going to happen next. So sometimes the next thing's going to have to be another phone call. Sometimes I want confirmation that they're going to attend an appointment at 2:00 next Thursday. So think about asking those questions or making those comments as brief and impactful as possible. They should always be open-ended. So you never want to ask a question that they could say no to. So when I'm reading this one,
I give the close up front.
so there isn't a, so I'd be interested in hearing more about that, because even we use third parties to audit ourselves because it's difficult to find issues in our own house.
That's
Right? Like that's a really long sentence. How can you make that a little punchier? Right? And how can you ask a question at the end that requires them to answer? That's a comment. What you want to do is take that and turn it into something where they have to answer you at the end.
So Bobby, we use a third party to do audits, so it precludes that. So you ask, oh, well, when's the last time we had a second set of eyes to come in and do an audit against it? Oh, within 12 months is the answer that all of my accounts that participate in risk assessments answer, within the past 12 months. And that third party uses my risk assessment process. So every single thing that they're going to do, we already know the answers to, so we solve for it. You got to kind of eat your own dog food. And if you're not doing a true blue risk assessment on your clients and bringing back things, even if it makes you look like you have egg on your face, then you're setting yourself up for failure, right? So as we've gone on, right, I've been doing this for 15 years, every year there's something new that we learn about that we go, I can't believe we haven't thought of that before. And that's the way I describe it is, hey, Carrie, we've been working together now for 3 years. And just 2 months ago, I went to this conference and I found this thing and we were doing your annual risk assessment and we've got this risk here and it's been there for 3 years. And here's what it is and here's how the risk works. And I think we should address it. You have that conversation. I've yet to have someone come back and say, oh, well, I can't believe you didn't consider this a risk before. It's, you don't know what you don't know. And as long as you've got that expression of coming from a place of trust and saying, hey, we found this thing, we're bringing it to you the second we became aware about it, people generally respond good to that.
So your feedback or your suggestion or the best practice would be to do a security risk assessment. So before you go and try and poke holes in other people's security process, make sure you have your own house in order.
Yes.
So the place to begin here, and also an interesting way to start asking for referrals, is to start conducting these security risk assessments with your own clients, and then asking them, who else in your network would be, interested potentially in talking about this, right? I'm sure that they go, if you find enormous security gaps in something, someone's going to go talk to someone about it.
So Coleman, yes and no. And so I'll dive into that, right? So do you charge for the security risk assessment for existing customers? Yes and no. So we have plenty of folks that are in regulated industries that have to have a security risk assessment every year. We've already set the bar there that yes, this is a chargeable event and we do it on a schedule. For the folks that aren't in regulated industries, it's yes and no. So we do a risk assessment against every single client, regardless whether we're retained to or not. And what we do with the ones that have not retained us for is that we come up with, okay, what's all the mitigations that we want to do? And we have a conversation and it would go something like, hey, Coleman, we did our annual health check against the security of the network and we found some issues. I'd like to schedule a time to go over and review it. And conveniently, on top of the cost of mitigation, split up equally is the cost of the risk assessment. So if the risk assessment is $3,000 and there's 10 issues, each of those things has a $300 kicker on top to pay me back for the risk assessment time. So yes, but no. Don't do these for free. That's the drum I'm trying to bang. If you're doing a good risk assessment, in my experience, it takes a lot of time, just like any IT, right? All of us know that there's that guy down the road who says he can drop a desktop in 20 minutes and it's going to be 100% set up and 100% good. And any of us who have complex environments knows that it takes more like 2 to 4 hours to do it right and make sure that everything's done to a T and that customer is really happy. So things like that.
Drives new revenue and establishes credibility.
That's right.
Agreed.
That's right. And you're everyone's friend. So again, this whole time you haven't made ABC IT look bad. If they ask the question, well, shouldn't ABC IT have caught this? I don't have visibility into ABCIT's practices. Our standard is A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, right? So you just walk them through your onboard practice. With every new client, here's the things that we do. They just invited you to talk about an onboard experience. So walk through your onboard process. And as part of that, we do this risk assessment, which gives us insight into all the security things for our year one hit list. Can't speak to ABCIT. This is what we do.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to avoid throwing. Yep. There are ways that you can poke holes in service delivery or risk, in this case, where you're not throwing dirt on your competitors, right? If anything, I would say there's some professional,
exactly.
The word I'm looking for.
It's professional courtesy. So
like I have competitors where an MSP will call me and I know that they're working with one of my competitors. One of the competitors I like, for example. There's some that I don't like, I don't care about them. But the ones that I like and have mutual respect for, the first thing I'm going to do is call them and say, hey, you guys looking.
Yep.
And I'll give you a month to rectify this. But if they're still unhappy in a month, I'm taking them. But I'll give you a month to figure it out. And I think that there is like most of you're not
professional courtesy.
You're not in a big town. You can't piss people off.
Yeah, so like the way that I'll run that, right? There's 6-8 guys in my town that all run solid MSPs. They're at that top where, hey, if I'm in a multi-bid situation, I know one of these 6 to 8 guys is going to be on there, if not all of them, right? So with them, I try to keep everything above board and friendly. Similar to what Carrie's doing, like someone calls me for a bid, I'm absolutely going to bid it, but I'm also going to call Carrie and say, hey, Carrie, by the way, ABC Co. gave me a call and they're looking for a bid. You didn't hear it from me. I thought you should know. And that's all I'm going to say is that, hey, like ABC Co.'s out for bid. I'm bidding them. Thought you'd want to know. And then when they come over, I'll ask about like, well, what were the reasons that you came over? What was it? I'll also do a courtesy for the guys that I'm really good friends with. Once a quarter, we go out for lunch and I say, by the way, the feedback that I've gotten, and I genericize this. So it wasn't ABC Co. The feedback that I've gotten on the ones that have come over to me from you was that there was response time issues and that your help desk was too hard to understand. So I'll give that feedback. One, it encourages them to give it back to me. So if people are leaving me to them, I absolutely want to know the real reason, and they're more likely to be honest with the new guy than they are with you when they're leaving. 2, I could get hit by a bus. And this is one thing that we all do a really bad thing around planning. I'm a big planner. I believe in having a plan for everything, including like personally and disaster insurance and all that type of stuff, right? I could get hit by a bus, I could be laid up, and I could just not be able to operate Doberman. And in that case, in that scenario, I'm going to need to be able to liquidate, right? I'm going to need to be able to find someone to buy my book, give my clients a safe place to land, give my team a safe place to land, and not take advantage of the situation too much so that I get some financial resources because my life suddenly got really hard. If you're friends with all your guys in town, you have 6 to 8 potential buyers of your business if the worst happens, right? Mm-hmm. If I get hit by a bus and I'm dead, then my family needs to liquidate Doberman. And having 6 to 8 guys who say, you know what, Ian's always done solid by us. We'll come in, we'll take a look at it. Like, yeah, we'd be willing to make an offer on the book. It gives you an out.
Yeah, I don't do it for that reason. So. I do it because I have found that if an MSP is working with a lead generation company and they're unhappy with them, quite often they have unrealistic expectations of what lead generation can do for them to begin with. Mm-hmm. And they're already on their third company. They went to Ulistic, then they went to Marketopia, and now they're coming to me. And you know what? Marketopia is an asshole, and Ulistic was an asshole too. You know who the next asshole is going to be? Managed Sales Pros. So it's not really about trying to be generous to a competitor so much as it is to make sure that, like, I don't want business for 3 months. Every time a company walks off of my roster, it costs me $12,000. So if this guy just churns through MSP lead generation companies every 3 months, that's a really big piece of information to know. So I want them to try and save it before I onboard them. And I may not even want that business at all, depending on what my competitor, again, the ones that I like, depending on what, like if Osprey is the person, like Osprey and I have been friends forever. EB Quickstart and I have been friends forever. EB Quickstart bought my business. So I had that experience that you're talking about happen, right? Like when I needed to sell my company because I could not staff effectively through the pandemic, I made one phone call and he's like, yeah, let's do this. And I had my company sold in 3 days. So it just benefits you to be decent to the people around you. There's no need to be sneaky and underhanded. I think just being a decent guy quite often is the best marketing approach you can take. But let's swing back around because we've only got 5 minutes left. And if there's any other questions from the participants today, I'd like Ian to have the opportunity to answer those questions.
Yeah, so sum up, if we're waiting for everyone to throw out something, sum up is really pivot to the risk assessment. When they say, hey, everything's hunky-dory, awesome. When's the last time we had a second set of eyes, right? When's the last time we did that audit? And use those magic items: healthcare, government, manufacturing, legal, professional services, insurance, finance. We do a lot. We're 65% healthcare. Channel EDE's been throwing us up for 5 years in a row now because of that focus on healthcare. So I'm on that list for every year running. So use it to pivot. Be friendly. Don't explain the technical stuff to someone you don't have a relationship with. You're not trying to poke technical holes in the guy. Have the meeting with the guy and say, hey, this is the list that we had. We've stack ranked them in what we thought was the most importance. Any questions on it? No? All right. They're getting the list on Tuesday, right? So you give them a heads up like, hey, start getting prepared. These guys are going to see this list. And all you do is give them the list. Here's a list of technical issues we found. ABCIT has them. Let's talk about the business risk aspects. And the business risk aspects are the things they really care about anyways. The tech stuff is just going to plant that seed of doubt.
That's a question for you too.
Do you do hybrid and pursue in-house IT? Yeah, we'll do co-manage. Co-manage is mailbox money. I love mailbox money. That's all the central services stuff is the stuff those guys hate to do. It's after hours support so they can go on vacation. They don't want to do security. They don't want to do backup. They don't want to do patch management. They don't want to do inventory and asset management budgeting. They just want to go out there and stage new computers and fix line of business problems. Have it. I don't want to do help desk. Go for it. I'll take the mailbox money all day and twice on Sunday.
But don't lead with mailbox money when you're prospecting.
No.
Right?
No.
It's just as so when you're thinking about how you're going and looking for business, it takes the exact same amount of time, effort, and energy to pursue 50-seat opportunities as it does to pursue 5-seat opportunities. And it's probably easier to do 50 seats because at 5, they just don't get it yet. Mm-hmm. Nothing really shitty has happened to their business at 5 people yet, right? Like they haven't had enough technology pain. They don't really have the same understanding of all the stuff that can go sideways at 5 employees as they do at 50. So at 50, they recognize the requirement for good IT support.
You got 50 people who are going like this, twiddling their thumbs because the server is down. They care about IT at that point. Steve, it's been a while since I ran it. Last I ran it was around 35.
The sweet spot for prospecting is 20 to 50. So if you're going to use outbound cold calling to look for new business opportunities, 20 to 50 seats. Below 20, if they haven't bought it yet, they don't care about it. And above 50, the sales process is significantly longer. There's more people involved in it, and it's more likely to go out to bid.
Oh yeah, you're talking about you get that 100-seat opportunity, right? That's $15,000 to $20,000 a month. There's no way they're going to single source that. 20 to 50, you still got a nice opportunity to come in with that $4 or $5 grand a month, and they just say, yeah, okay, that sounds good, and they sign the contract. You don't have to deal with multi-bid.
And remember, you don't have to go all the way to the C-suite to sell something like a risk assessment, right? Yep. Nobody needs to go looking for budget for something under $5,000. Yep. Everybody needs to get sign off on a $5,000 a month managed services contract. So when you're going in and initially looking for business, you don't have to have the first conversation with the CEO, right? Anybody that answers the phone can probably give you enough information to know whether or not this is an opportunity that you want to pursue. Find out whether or not they like the IT company. It doesn't matter who picks up the phone. Those are the people that you're talking to. Identify whether or not they have IT support. Identify what kind of IT support if they know. And a good question for that is like, well, if your computer breaks, what happens?
We're at time.
Yeah. And then, for all you know, this is the person that is single point of contact for the IT support, or this is the person that's writing the check to pay that bill, so they know how much they're spending. Qualify your opportunities before you spend 50 calls trying to reach a decision maker that isn't interested or isn't qualified. We're at the top of the hour. It's 4:00. I'm not going anywhere. If anyone has other questions, I'm happy to stick around. Otherwise, always want to respect everyone's time. We appreciate you spending some time with us today. So, we'll be here for a few more minutes if you have a few more questions. And other than that, I hope you'll join us on our next webinar. There's a whole list of them on our website at Managed Sales Pros /live streams. And we're talking about different ways that you can use prospecting to win managed services business long-term by using smaller, easier to sell things like risk assessments. And I'm still looking for a good name for wedge selling if anyone has one.
Yeah, so titles, usually managers, controllers, things like that. Every once in a while I get a CFO. VP is always a nice one too, Steve. But typical medical practice, typical healthcare practice, it's office manager, practice administrator. So it's not a non-ownership, but admin type of role that would sign off on something like this. If it's a compliance-based organization, you want the compliance officer, because the compliance officer will say, oh yeah, well, we're doing a risk assessment, etc. Yeah, check in the box, make sure we're compliant with the code. Absolutely. When's the last time we had a second set of eyes on our compliance? And they'll go, oh, yeah, no, that's probably a good idea. So you get someone who's lives and dies in compliance. HR is good for that too. HR really usually resonates. If you get someone who has a director of HR or an HR manager, HR is usually in charge of compliance, and they're a good one to kind of pop this into if they're regulated industry. So they recognize the idea of an audit. That's why that word is so key. Anyone who's in that managerial aspect and in a regulated industry, you say audit, and they tense right up. They tense right up. So
excellent. Well, Steve, I could go on forever about how to get into managed services opportunities through any department in the company, especially as the size of the business scales. But it only works if you're prepared to do land and expand selling, right? If you're only going in and saying, we're only working with companies that are giving us the managed deal right off the hop, land and expand doesn't work as well, because you're not really willing to take the $1,000 here and the $500 there and the mailbox money there. But if you think about it, there isn't one department within any company that doesn't drastically improve performance when their IT improves.
Yep.
Right? So whether that's vendor management as a service or having the opportunity to sell and support different systems within those different departments, right? Like there's got to be a billion things you can sell to the marketing department that don't require them to go get budget for it. Then you develop a relationship with that person. And when it's time for them to go shopping for a new IT provider, well, you already have a relationship with a bunch of people at that company. It is a no-brainer that they're going to ask you to quote, but first you have to get in there. It's a long game. All land and expand strategies are a long game, but it gives you a significant advantage over your competitors who are also banging away at the same competitive list nonstop. If you're already in there, even if it's only for a $500 a month recurring software sale of some kind, the odds on you winning that are significantly above the guy that they've never even talked to before.
Yeah, you're going to be on the list for them to call. So that's what you want. You just want to see at the table.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.
See
Have
you
a
all
great
later.
afternoon. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Carrie.
Right, how to turn this off.